Well, welcome to the X Podcast. I am so glad you're joining us, whether you're watching this online, YouTube, or any of the podcast platforms. If you're listening, we're so excited to have you with us today. We have a very special episode ahead of us. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Got my good friend Russ. Russ, I'm glad to see you as well.
I'm glad to be here.
Yep, glad to be you. And you may notice that we don't have Kevin with us. We upgraded our spot. No, I'm just teasing. I love Kevin. But we have a special guest with us today. I'm so excited to have Kayla Lockhart on our podcast today. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. It's such an honor to be here today. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. Kayla is a friend of mine, longtime friend, and my wife and I, we met you, back in, I don't know exactly, almost 8 years ago.
Yeah.
7 or 8 years ago. Our daughters danced together, and they were in DI.
DI.
Yes,
Yeah.
DI. You familiar with DI? Mm-hmm. You are? What's
Yeah, I learned
what's
a few
DI?
moments ago, and I still
did you
can't
learn?
remember.
What is it?
It's
What's
the,
DI stand for?
It's not the Dinosaur Institute. It's the
not
Directional
the-
Inclusive.
It's not. Destination Imagination.
Yes.
And so our daughters were a part of that, which was a lot of fun. And I think my wife and I got to know you and just fell in love with you and your story. And then you, shortly after that, started coming to our church.
Yeah.
And so you're a part of our church. And I just knew that when we would kind of dive into a subject that I wanted to talk about, there was nobody else that I wanted to have sitting at this table but you.
Oh,
And so thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
And in fact, before we jump into our topic today,
Big day.
It is a big day because today's your birthday.
Come on.
Yes.
Turn 23.
23 years old.
No, I'm 36, you guys.
She wanted to say it.
I know.
Okay.
I would not have forced
Man.
you to be forthcoming with that. But, well, happy birthday
Yeah,
to
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
We're so glad.
Thank
In
you.
fact, we knew it was coming, so we got you a birthday card
my
with something in it just to say thank you for being on the show and really happy birthday. And
Thank
so thank you for doing
you.
this on your birthday.
Yeah.
I just think that's
I love
incredible that you would come and be a part of this on your birthday. And so what we want to talk about today and I want to dive into is actually something that really came to us through a listener that was really processing due to a coworker and just somebody that had so many it just felt like bad thing after bad thing happened to him. And I think this is something that a lot of people really do wrestle with, which is this idea of why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah.
And I think one thing we know for sure is that every single person has experienced something bad in their life, and there's really no benefit in ever comparing what we all have to go through. But I do think it tends to become one of the things that people hang their hat on when it comes to belief in God. It seems like it's one of the number one reasons why people maybe struggle to believe in God, or I would say maybe not just even believing in God, but believing in a good God, a good and loving God. In fact, if you're watching this today or you're listening, and maybe you would put yourself in the camp where you say you're not a believer, maybe you'd say you're agnostic, you're atheist, or you've just really struggled. Maybe you kind of find yourself in no man's land when it comes to faith, because maybe there was a time when you believed, but then some things happened in your life and you just have not been able to reconcile belief in God with the pain of this world and the suffering in this world. And I want you to know that we hear you, and I think this is something that we as pastors and leaders, and you especially in your life, as we're going to talk about, have had to come face to face with this. And in fact, I talked about it this past weekend.
You did.
In the Soul Work
So good.
series. Just really talking about this kind of challenge that we have, where we have questions in our soul when it gets pressed.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from this past Sunday?
Oh, it was so good. And just shameless plug, if you don't attend the X Church, go to the X.church and watch this series, because whatever you believe, I think this is something for every single person, because we're talking about the soul.
Yeah.
It's called Soul Work because we're dealing with, especially in a church context, the church has a bad history of trying to deal with emotional issues with spiritual solutions.
Yep.
And so we're talking about how emotions are the language of the soul. And God has, we believe, not just given us a body, a spirit, but also a soul. So this week you talked about, to address emotional health, we have to address our emotional hurts.
Yeah.
And that we all have pain.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I love that you refuse to do is you refuse to give cliches. In fact, you spent a considerable amount of time walking us through all the bumper sticker verses and cliches that people tend to give, and just refusing to go there, because when you have real hurt, in fact, I was thinking about, you talked about so many people that don't believe because of the pain they've experienced.
Yeah.
It's interesting when Scripture talks about people who don't believe in God, it actually uses the phrase, those who say there is no God in their heart. It doesn't say those who say there is no God in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think so many times it's the things that we've experienced emotionally that actually forces us to close the door on a God that's disappointed us in our own mind. And so what I love, you refuse to give pat answers.
Yeah.
You know, we
just dive into the pain.
We just dove into the pain. Talk about how Jesus dove into our pain.
Yeah.
I mean, and you gave some brilliant insights about, I mean, I think we're all aware of the conundrum, whatever you believe, that free will causes. And you talk about the double-edged sword of freedom. Yeah. The truth is, anything beautiful in life, you're never going to be able to experience without the risk of that also being an optional reality. Yeah. So you're never going to experience love unless there's the risk of pain. Yeah. And so we dove into some of those mysteries and some of those paradoxes, but at the end of the day, one of the things we did that you did so beautifully on Sunday is what we try to do here is give space to actually just process that pain in a healthy way.
That's what it is. And that's kind of what we do here on this podcast. Is the whole goal is to process things. Yeah. To think critically, but I think also to walk through experiences and how we're handling them. And so, Kayla, I want to talk just a little bit about your life and your story, specifically with your son, Aiden. Yeah. And I feel like you've had a lot of time to process, kind of like feeling like being dealt the bad hand. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, that might sound terrible, but I don't know, the challenge. Let's put it this way, challenging hand. And a little bit about you that, you know, I don't know if you want to share it. I mean, I know personally that you have 4 kids. Yep. And that you're married, and you have, what, 3 boys and 1 girl? Yep. And Ashley's the oldest, right? Yes. And so why don't you tell us a little bit just about your family and tell us a little bit about Aiden.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the 4 kids, and they range from 2 years old to almost 15 years old. Wow. So I have a big range there. And I had 2 healthy children. So I was 25 years old and had my second baby, and everything's great. My husband and I had a surprise pregnancy after my second child, Andrew.
What do you mean by surprise pregnancy? Because I'm not really sure. Can you ever be surprised by that? Like,
you know.
Okay, so you weren't planning on it. Just okay.
It was like surprise.
Surprise! It just happened one day. Immaculate conception. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So, I had a 10-month-old. I was still nursing. So, fun fact.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
You need to.
10-month-old.
Yep. Huh. Andrew was 10 months old, so I was still nursing and all the things. So, surprise. Yeah. We were gonna have our 3rd baby, which was fine. We knew we wanted 4 or 5 kids. But you know,
did you see that violent head shake?
4 or 5
that
kids.
Was like triggering or something.
I'm just always impressed by people that go, we just want a lot of kids. We want a basketball team.
What was the desire for that many?
I honestly don't know.
We just did.
Kids.
I think we love kids, and we knew. I was young when we had kids, and we're like, we have lots of time to have lots of babies. So we just love
plenty of arrows from the quiver.
That's right.
Like we just love children. So
cool.
but because of that, because that was part of the story, because it was a surprise, I didn't find out until I was 8 weeks pregnant, like that I was expecting, which for me, I'm usually one at like 3 weeks. I'm like, for the last 2, so I'm like, oh, little nervous. I wasn't taking my prenatal. That actually has nothing to do with my story, but it just goes into my mindset kind of already a seed was planted of like, oh, there could be something not right here. So they confirmed the pregnancy, and I kept just telling my husband, like, I just feel like I'm going to miscarry or something. And I didn't have that with my other 2 pregnancies. He's like, what are you talking about? So fast forward
you felt like something wasn't right.
I just, and I even kept telling
Mother's
my husband, like,
maybe.
it is. And I know we all have that fear. A lot of women, when you get pregnant, you have that fear. Like, you want to get to 12 weeks. And, but this was like, not an obsession, but I was very fearful. Like, something's just wrong. And so fast forward to 15 weeks in my pregnancy, and I told my husband, let's go get one of those like 3D, 4D $300 ultrasounds.
Yeah.
And he's like, one, have you lost your mind? And two, he was like, that's not like you. I'm a very medical, like, you only do what's medically necessary. And I was like, no, I want to find out the gender with the little kid. Like, let's take the whole family. There's no way we can bring a 14-month-old.
Yeah.
And Ashley was like 4 at the time. So we went into that ultrasound thinking, we're going to find out the gender of our baby, and this is going to be so much fun. And I knew as soon as she started the ultrasound, like, she got very somber. And I was like, but I could see, like, he was moving on the screen, 15 weeks along, everything's pretty well formed, and you can make things out in an ultrasound. And I'm like, well, he's moving, he's alive, it's not like I've miscarried. And like 10 minutes in, she said, because our moms came with us to help with wrangle all the children we already had. So she's like, I need your moms to leave the room with the kids. And we were like, no, like, we want them to know the gender. This isn't a surprise. We're learning this together. And she's like, you need them to leave right now. And immediately my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, this is not going to be good news. But I didn't know what. I still was like sitting there like, he's moving, like, it's fine. She wasn't able to tell us because, as you know, if you've been through any medical testing, an ultrasound tech or radiologist, they can't tell you. She just kept telling us how sorry she was, and I'm going to call your doctor immediately. We're going to give you a full refund. I'm like, if they're refunding a $300 ultrasound, this cannot be good news. But I was still full of hope. Like, my husband was.
But she wouldn't tell you anything.
No, other than, like, she did say there's something. She kept going back to his heart. She's like, I can see something with his heart and his brain. So when we left there, she had asked the biggest, like, oh no, she said, do you still want to know the gender? And I was like, that's when I started crying. Like, it's really bad if I don't want to know the gender of my baby. Wow. I was like, so of course we go to Google that night because we had to wait the next day. Our doctor is like, I can get you into Riverside Fetal. That's where you go for like all of your when you're high risk and all that. So my husband starts Googling and he's like, all the things with the brain, anencephaly and trisomy 13 and all the we're like, okay, let's look at all of the worst case scenarios. So we go the next day though. I have to go in without my husband because we don't leave our children with babysitters. So I was gonna have to be the one to absorb it, then tell my husband. And they go in at 15 weeks in my pregnancy. They were able to tell us he had a severe heart defect. And I'm like, his heart has to be like, just medical technology fascinates me. It's just shocking. But they knew he had a heart defect and he had spina bifida. And I'm like, okay, like, kids can survive this. And the specialists, these are very highly trained medical professionals. And they're like, you don't understand. Like, this is very serious. Like, we don't know how bad his spina bifida is. That can, we're seeing that it's pulling down on his brain stem and he's got fluid on his brain. And if we can see his heart defect already, it's pretty bad. So they prepared us then, telling us, because it's so complex, a lot of kids aren't born with multiple birth defects. So they generally kind of get one thing, and that's it. And they said, don't expect to, that he's going to survive the pregnancy. Wow. We were like, okay, my worst fears of what I thought at 8 weeks, I'm like, this is what God was preparing me for.
Wow.
But throughout my entire pregnancy, we saw dozens of specialists because you have to be prepared. If you guys are familiar with Columbus, if you live in the area, Nationwide Children's Hospital is one of the best in the country. And they do an amazing job prenatally of preparing you so that you're not shocked, at birth. But as we walked through the pregnancy, they just kept telling us worst case. Like, this is, we also found out he had a chromosome abnormality on top of everything else. We'd had to find that out. It's called 22q deletion syndrome. And the way they say it, we'll put it out there, medical doctors, he's going to be severely mentally retarded. And I said, okay, like, God, when they talk about that, like, the peace that surpasses all understanding, it was in that moment I understood. I never had my freak out. I just kept, God is going to carry us. I was almost kind of like I'm going to prove you wrong. Like, this baby's kicking. He is alive. If he survived those early weeks, I'm like, we've got this. So throughout the whole pregnancy, they kept telling us he's not going to survive pregnancy. If he does, he's going to die shortly after birth. And I'm like, okay, well, that's our story. Like, we're going through with this
Wow.
and I'm going to love him. Yeah. So Aiden was born
Yeah.
alive, as
Yeah.
we know. Like, yeah. And to preface, this was 10 years ago. So 10 years ago in February is when we had the ultrasound. So it's been
Wow.
a decade walking
And the
this journey.
prognosis was that if he survived the pregnancy, what was the prognosis after that? Like, what did they tell you to expect?
They said he will either die like immediately after birth or within the first year of life. No ifs, ands, or buts. Like, you are not getting your baby. So much that there was paperwork we had to sign. We had already talked to a funeral home, got a plot for him. It was really hard. It's looking back now, it doesn't even feel like my life. Like, that is my child that you love. Like, you love them so much. You know, if you've had a child or been pregnant, from the moment of conception, like, you are obsessed with that child and will do anything for them. So it was some really hard times. Like, I had that peace, but there were some dark moments of, you're really going to make me bury my child? Like, he has fought and he is, you know.
Well, and so I want to lean into that moment, like the years after he was born. And as you're saying that, like, this, they're telling you there's not much hope. He's not got one birth defect, multiple birth defects. I mean, you're going to talk about a situation where you go, I wasn't just handed one bad card.
Yeah.
I was given my whole hand has
The
some
whole
hard.
deck.
He came into this world with a lot of challenges. What were miraculously? Okay, if you're watching or listening to this, you go, I don't believe in the miracle working of life, and I don't believe in God. That's fine, but I will tell you, every doctor said he should not survive more than the first year. We'll just go ahead and say it now. He's still alive.
Yes.
He's still.
He's going to be 10 this summer.
Going to be 10 years old this summer,
yeah.
and we'll stick some pictures up, and people can see him. He's an amazing young man, incredible boy. And but what was it like, that journey? Because you had to deal with a whole lot of medical things throughout the years.
Yes. Absolutely, especially like the first 3 to 4 years were what we call like intense. There's no other way to describe. So when people talk about miracles, I always tell people part of it's your perspective too. It's not like I can sit here and say we've had a miracle. It's not the miracle some people would expect. Some people may think you're going to see Aiden walking across the stage and like talking and fine. It didn't look that way, but it's the small things along the way that was like, this is God. Like doctors, it has been incredible to watch doctors, Aiden soften doctors' hearts to bring them closer to Jesus, because his story is that powerful. It's incredible. So the first 3 or 4 years, Aiden had over 20 surgeries, and I'm talking major, like brain surgeries, spine surgeries, open heart surgeries, and every time they were like, kind of, say goodbye. Like, there's no way this kid can continue with how broken his body, like God gave him a very broken body. And we just kept having faith and having hope. And in those early days, I very much like clung to God. And I was just like, Lord, you're going to get this through us. It was such a whirlwind. I didn't really have much time to think of anything else other than like, God is getting us through. But as the years wore on and I saw my son suffer, like his life was, it's hard to say, because I also want to say, like, his life is beautiful, but it is full of suffering.
Painful.
It is very painful.
What's it like? Can you describe how has his quality of life been through the years? Like,
we've had ups and downs. Right now we're in a moment of he's in palliative care, which isn't necessarily end of life, but for Aiden it's more for pain control and assessing that quality of life. It's something we are constantly assessing, trying to respect Aiden, because he is nonverbal. So to make you understand, he cannot verbalize with us when he's hurting or when something's wrong or when he's scared. So right now we're actually in a hard space. We are, in fact, tomorrow, we were supposed to record this podcast tomorrow. Aiden has a big follow-up. Aiden just had heart surgery 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. He had his 4th. And
can you imagine
right now,
heart surgery?
Yeah.
He's 9 years old. He's had 4 heart surgeries alone.
Yes. And that's just in itself, not to mention, like, he had major spine surgery in November. So we're coming off of we went like the past 2 years of, I would say Aiden's quality of life is amazing. Like he's doing great. And this fall we started to have our decline that we don't know what it means for Aiden. But we are just going to love him through it. And we do the best we can and respect when he needs to be in bed or when we can get out and do things. So,
wow. I have a million questions. Let me, you said something, actually offline before we started that fascinated me. And you said it in passing, but we were talking about, what you feel comfortable sharing and not sharing. And you said, I feel comfortable sharing it all because it's not my story. It's God's story. And and you're specifically referring to Aiden, what's the difference of that? I'm curious to you, like, what's the difference of, no, this is just a normal story, but no, this is a God story.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And specifically when you're talking about him, what's the God part of that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, what I mean, so to back up is I'm a very private, before Aiden, I was a very private, reserved, like didn't talk about our story, our family, not on social media. And when Aiden was born, like through the pregnancy, when Aiden was born, I've always had like a close connection to God. I feel like I am one that, okay, he is speaking to me. This is what he keeps planting those seeds. And I knew he kept saying like, you need to share this story. And I was like, that makes me really uncomfortable, like putting ourselves out there. And over the years, I've learned to swallow my pride, that it's not like my story to share, or even Aiden, it is God's light shining. Like this is all God. Like if you were to this day, I just had a conversation last week with one of Aiden's doctors, because we are in close, they're always, so Aiden's one, we have to resuscitate him a lot. He's a very, what they would call critical and complex kid. And so we are in constant tough conversations with them. And he said to me, he's meeting with us next week, and he said, I know I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again. There is no medical explanation for how Aiden is still alive. When you look at imaging, scans, everything he's been through, he defies all medical. And so to me, that is such a God story. I mean, that is
we
like,
have no medical way of explaining it.
Yes. Like even the things Aiden has been through, and I'll talk in a moment, where I had my big shift of when I was a time when I was angry at God and to what put me in the place that I'm at today. And again, that it's just it's such a powerful God. Like Aiden's will to live is not of like human the things.
Wow.
So what he went through that changed me was Aiden had a brain surgery. And a couple days.
How old was he at this time?
At this point, I think he was 4.
So
I think he was 4 years
about
old.
5 years ago, maybe almost 6 years ago. You had a moment here.
Yeah, because the years from probably like 2 years old to 4 years old was my exhausting. I know you and I have talked before. We didn't sleep much.
Yeah.
My husband and I, Aiden's on life support, so he has a ventilator that keeps him alive, especially at that point. Yeah, 24/7.
He's on a ventilator 24/7.
So right now
doesn't eat.
No, it doesn't eat by mouth.
What, you have feeding tube?
Yep, he has a feeding tube. So, and over the years, there's been little times he could come off his vent a little bit. We're back to 24/7 right now. But we've had those like miracles along the way when we needed him to be off, God provided though. It's just so incredible. But from like 2 to 4 years old probably is when I was at my most exhausted. We were staying up. My husband and I would take shifts. We would each only sleep 2 to 3 hours a night because we chose not to have nursing care. Some people wonder like, why don't you have a nurse? We had other children in our home. You know, we have 2 other kids, and we decided as a family for privacy and what was best and safest for our family was no nursing care. You know, we need. And so that meant sacrifices. You know, there's always a sacrifice when you make a decision.
Sleep.
So and sleep was our so we watched him around the clock. So I was getting, and he was just so much suffering.
Can I say, why did you have to watch him around the clock? What was this? What was the essence of that?
So he, when starting around 16 months old is when he started having severe airway collapses. So even on his vent, and that's where the doctor said they would take him into the OR on their heavy powered machines, and they take pictures, kind of like a CT scan. And they would watch on their high-powered machines, total collapse. They would push it open. It would not open.
Oh, my gosh.
And they just sent us home like that, like on our little vent, our home vent. And that's why, like, it's not a medical, like, like, and so it was stressful. So there was times we would have to resuscitate. That's why we'd stay up all around the clock, because he would just be sleeping on his vent. Yeah, on a vent.
And you'd have to resuscitate him.
Yeah.
You've had to resuscitate him
so many times. Like just a few weeks ago. Like it's
Oh my
all the
gosh.
time.
I
Yeah,
can't even
just-
imagine what it would be like
Yeah.
to have to resuscitate someone,
Yeah.
but to have to do it all the time.
Oh, it's God,
your
because it's
son?
not me. I'm not a
Oh.
medical. I am like before Aiden. I was like, if my kids, I'm that one that like, if they bumped their head, I would be like, we got to go to urgent care. Like, it is not my personality.
Can you take me to,
gosh.
if you feel comfortable,
Yeah.
can you take me to one of your, I don't know, just your moments of humanity hitting? Because when you said in that instant, I felt the peace that passed all understanding. I mean, I could feel that here at this table.
Yeah.
There's a tangible peace on your life. And, you know, and maybe it's another reason it's a God story, because it's not just his story in God, it's your story in God, it's your family story in God. I think of this verse where Paul says, we comfort each other with the comfort that we ourselves have received from God. It's one thing for me to comfort someone.
Yeah.
It's another thing for you to comfort someone. There's a tangible peace you've experienced in the middle of the greatest heartache of a mom.
Yeah.
And I know that's a piece that is carried through, but in all of our seasons, especially while we're living on earth, there's moments of humanity and brokenness. And I know there's been moments where just in your flesh, it's caught up. Like what how have you processed that? How have you processed the low moments where maybe the feelings of that peace weren't as strong?
Yeah. Well, that's a deep one. So there's been times of feeling, of course, you're watching your child suffer. Like you read about, I grew up learning about Mary watching Jesus suffer. And I always said to myself, I cannot imagine. Like you would just, I remember being a teenager and I would just sob like, what kind of a, you know, why would a mother have to watch her child suffer like that? And then God said,
Wow.
here you go. And I'm going to you're going to watch him suffer for years. It wasn't like, and there's no
Not
cure.
a lot of people
Yeah,
know
and
what that's like.
Yes.
No.
And it's not a cure. It's not like Aiden has anything that we can look a year out
Yeah.
from now. Of course, we believe in miracles. We believe God can make Aiden walk and breathe on his own, but we also accept what he's given us. And when you watch them suffer and go through so many things, it wears on your heart, where there's been times I've like cried out of like, I am very open with God, and I will tell him when I am angry, and I will say, I have told the words like, I hate you. And I would be like, and then I'm like, no, if he is a good and loving father, he's going to accept it. Just like if my children thank the Lord, they've not said it yet, but I've got a teenager and it could come. I don't know. But that like, I hate you for what you have done to him. But then, when I'm being brought up, I'm like, God didn't do this to him.
And how
Like,
amazing is that? Because so many people in their pain that have experienced, and again, it's pointless to compare pain. Pain's pain.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there's so many people that, from at least an earthly circumstantial perspective, would say they've not experienced half of what you've experienced, but it's caused them to run away
Yeah.
from God.
I
And
was
the
thinking
fact
the same
that,
thing.
and I heard somebody say something one time, and it reminded me when you said what you said. They said, and maybe this is helpful for someone that maybe you're staying away from God because you feel angry. They said, anger is an acceptable offering to bring God.
Yeah.
And that sometimes, our tendency is when we're angry, I'm going to stay away until I feel better.
Yeah.
Or I feel like I'm right.
Yeah.
And they said, Russ, your honesty and your anger to come before God and say, I don't even know if I'm mad at the right person.
Yeah.
And I don't even
But
know
what if you
that.
have no one to be mad at?
Right.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like with Aiden, there was we didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
It ended up being what he had. It wasn't because I didn't take my prenatals
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And I knew like God didn't. He's not gonna like, oh, here, I want my child to suffer. Because ultimately I had to come to that realization, and it is hard as a mother. He is not my son. He is God's son.
Wow.
And he loves him more. Sometimes I argue and I'm like, you can't possibly love this child more than I do. But he does.
What a
he does.
perspective.
That
And
is
I think,
amazing.
when you ask like, why have I not like run away and stayed run away? And it's as simple as this, honestly. It's Aiden. I know the Lord is going to take Aiden probably well before he takes me. And I want to know I'm going to go be with Aiden when he is with Jesus. And like, honestly, Aiden keeps our family so I will do whatever it takes, buddy, because I know you're going with Jesus. And Aiden has, if you've ever been around him, you know that child's spirit.
Yeah.
He has Jesus. Like, he has people. He'll have, like, the scariest looking person at Walmart, this, like, big guy that, like, looks scary. He will bring him to his knees, like, where Aiden will reach out, and Aiden's just one that's, like, he likes to touch your face, and he'll just hug people in Walmart, and they are just, like, taking – that is, like, the love of Jesus. Like, he embodies the love. Kid. Yeah. Like, he really –
So I want to make sure not to miss, because this moment – because I think it's really important and powerful. You said that somewhere after that 4th year something switched. Yeah. And I think that's really insightful for people to hear that, you know?
It's and it's a hard story, but it is such the crucial point where I'm at now. When I was in that exhaustion – and in that lowest place was Aiden had another brain, like his 16th or something. He'd had a lot. And he had a new neurosurgeon who didn't know Aiden well. And we were still figuring each other out. So he sent him home a few days later. We were on our way home, and I look at my husband. I'm like, something's really wrong. Like, he's trying to vomit. And Aiden has a surgery where he's had one that he can't vomit. But I'm like, something's wrong. We need to go back now. And my husband's like driving, like, I don't really want to, are you sure, honey? And I was like, we need to get back now. We end up getting him there. He had a major brain hemorrhage. He was bleeding. The neurosurgeon said one of the worst brain bleeds he's ever seen. And he looks at me, and we're still learning each other. We don't know, like, we knew all of Aiden's medical team. He didn't know me he had done one surgery, and he said, I don't have time to get him to OR. We have to get him up to the ICU, and I need to start surgery immediately. And I was like, okay. And I'm like following behind, like, I don't know what this means. So we get up, the nurses said, can you handle do you want to be in the room or not? And I'm like, for brain surgery? and she's like, yeah. And I'm like, am I allowed? And because I'm like, I don't want to leave my son. I'm one that some people are like, I'm not. And to me, if Aiden's going through it, I can at least be there for him. Well, what ended up happening was it was so emergent. Like, he was crashing. They're watching his numbers. And the surgeon looks at me, and he said, I have to start without him being sedated. So they paralyzed him. They got pain meds going. Aiden is awake as they start brain surgery. And I'm standing there. And as a mother, and I'm just like looking at the surgeon, like, save him. In that moment, you're like, save him. And so, and you think that they can go to sleep quickly. Even the doctors that are like pushing meds, they're like, I've never seen a kid fight so hard. Like, they're like, give us more, whatever they were giving to sedate. And he was still like awake, but they were paralyzed. They at least had to paralyze, which was the worst, because I'm looking at Aiden. They let me sit at the foot of the bed, which is just incredible. It's such a God thing to begin with, because they're like, the surgeon was even like, is someone getting mom out of the room? And I'm like, oh, I'm not leaving. Like, no, because the nurse is like, I said she could stay, you know. But what was my turning point then was Aiden had a tear running down his cheek as he's paralyzed. He's still awake as they are cutting in to perform, because they basically needed to get a drain tube in immediately to start draining all of the blood and, you know, protect the hemorrhaging. And in that moment, I knew it's his greatest suffering. I can't imagine as an adult if you need to have a surgery like that and you're aware of what's going on, but they have you paralyzed, and it's like your worst fear of like, what if I'm not asleep during surgery? You know, you've
feeling
heard
it and you can't.
Yes, and I look at Aiden. And I say, Aiden, go to Jesus. Like, Aiden, your time, you are done. Mommy and Daddy love you. We support you. Go to Jesus. And his numbers just, you know, he's hanging on. And that's when I like cry out to Jesus. And I said, if you don't take him now, like, you need to take him. I thought, because you come to that point, you love your child so much. Yeah. I am willing to suffer the pain from him. Well, they finally got him sedated like 30 minutes into the surgery, finished the surgery. And I'm just I call my husband. I'm like, I just watched him like awake through brain surgery, and everyone, he's still very critical at this point. And my change was the next morning. Aiden wakes up and gives me the biggest smile. And I was just like, okay, how can I be angry to God? Like, you knew, you took that on of, Mom, I've got this and I'm going to be fine. And in that moment, I promised. I was like, Aiden, I can't. You're so full of love, and Jesus was there with you. And I believe that for him to smile the next day after that kind of trauma, like, there is no other thing but Jesus was with him. When I felt like there is no God, how can you do this to him? It was Aiden's way, I think, of saying, it's okay, Mom. Like, that smile, I'm like, dude, you just went through and because he's had to spend like 3 weeks in the hospital after that, dealing with this brain hemorrhage. in that entire hospital stay, he was the most joyful. I mean, he had this tube hanging out of his head, draining this huge bag of blood beside his bed. And he was so playful and so ornery that I know some people would be like, I would just question God. There was no, God was there. Like, Jesus was right there through watching that. And I've just never really had such anger since. There's times I go in my valleys. Of course, you're just like, you know, right now what we're going through, and Aiden's kind of dealing with a lot of pain right now in our story. There are times, of course, I'm just like, God, why are you allowing this to continue to go on? And then I have that voice of, Aiden's purpose is not done. And I don't know what that is. I may never fully know, but, you know, we get stories and people will say, I'm going to church now because of Aiden. And we are very open about our faith. And, you know, everyone knows we pray with Aiden, whether he understands or not. I believe he does on some level. So we are always talking about Jesus. And, you know, and I'm not afraid to tell God when I'm angry. I've come a long way. And now I'll just be like, I'm upset with you. Like,
I love the fact that your story is crazy. I don't have words to say you know,
there needs to be a book.
Yeah, and I don't you know, I've known some of your story, but hearing the details is like, oh my gosh, it is weighty. It's like the suffering, but the perspective that you have is what blows me away. And I think you want to talk about faith, you know, real faith in the midst, like most, as you said, most people run. Most people run away from God with their questions. And you didn't. And I think because of that, God gave you, I want to say, a gift of a perspective that I will say this, because I know you fairly well, have been around you for years, probably after that experience.
Yeah.
Around it. And I was telling Russ this earlier, you are one of the most joy-filled, faith-filled, positive, amazing mothers I've ever met. Like, and it's like, to go through everything that you've gone through and still are going through with your family, and to somehow have the positive, faith-filled spirit that you carry is humbling to me. And I think there is a story, as he says, a book, but there really is. There's a story in this that, I think you said it so well, that God is telling. And it's really hard to make sense of pain. And I just don't know that we can make sense. And I don't want to. I think sometimes I go, well, you know, and I love what you said. God didn't cause this. We're living in a really broken world where there's genetic things that are broken and things that happen and that are so unfortunate that are in this world. But to have I'm blown away. I'm blown away by you know what I mean? By your faith and your perspective. It challenges me.
Oh my gosh.
I have nothing to complain about.
No.
I have nothing to complain about.
I was sitting here thinking,
I don't have
problems.
I can't ever have a pity party.
I don't have problems. I don't want to, and I don't want to cheat. I don't even want to cheapen your story with words. I just, what you said, I'm inspired by your faith. I'm mesmerized and challenged by your perspective. And then you mentioned a word that just 5 minutes into us talking, right after I met you, was the phrase that came to me as your spirit. That I'm a big believer that it's your spirit that determines everything, and you have a spirit that blazes through everything else. And one of the things about your spirit that I noticed right away is that we were asking you questions about yourself, but one of the things I feel like pain tends to do is to cause us to focus on ourselves. And one of the things I noticed about you is you've not let your pain determine this to be about you at all. Everything in your language and your spirit brings us back to what God is doing, and brings us back to a perspective that's bigger than your own. I'm curious. I mean, you probably already answered this, but maybe even just if there's practicals. I'm just curious. What are your in what some would call a storm? This storm that you've navigated as far as the challenges of everything. What are some of your anchors?
Yeah. So one thing is, and Tim will know this from over the years, is I'm not afraid to reach out when we need prayer, when we need not just prayer, but and you actually preached about it on Sunday, that practical help. And Tim and Lorley have been there for us. So Aiden had another dramatic one was when he had a blood infection and a heart infection, and with having a bad heart already, that's worst case for a heart kiddo. And that was another time he's not going to survive. Like and that's actually the effects. What we're feeling right now is actually those effects from what happened. Was it 4 or 5 years? 5 years, I think.
I don't think it was that long ago. Was it? When we went to the hospital?
Yeah.
I thought it was just maybe, I don't know, time goes fast.
Yeah.
You're right.
Like maybe like
it could be 3 or 4
yeah.
years ago, but I
Yeah.
remember being in the hospital and praying with them, because I remember you reached out to us. And for somebody who's had, at this point, he was probably 6 or 7, I don't know, maybe, and just you'd seen how many surgery you're going, well, this is it. He's probably not going to make it. Yeah. But I remember when you reached out and you were like, this is really bad. I really don't know that he's going to make it. And going to the hospital and praying with him. And they came, they were I think within 40 minutes, and they probably live 40 minutes away. They were at that hospital. And that was tangibly what I needed, because we were friends. It wasn't the pastor of my church. They were friends. They were there as dear friends. And Laura's always been that person. She's you need that person, that confidant. I've never been embarrassed. There's nothing I'm ashamed to tell. When I went through anxiety, that finally caught up with me throughout the journey. That's something I've struggled with. And she came to my house and was like, I'm not just going to pray with you. I'm going to bring you a drink. I'm going to bring you food. I'm going to help watch Aiden. Because you don't trust Aiden to many people. Nobody. No. My wife has a medical background. She's a nurse, NICU nurse. And so
she knew. She was very familiar.
I know how to deal with him if I have to resuscitate him.
She was go take a nap, And those are ways tangible throughout the years of having those people that they didn't hesitate. I need you to come be with me at the hospital because it's really bad. And actually, when they were there, they came in with worse news. I remember his numbers were going his heart rate was skyrocketing. They came in with worse, the infections not going away with the treatment and they were there just to, Laura, just to hold me, just to hug me and have that comfort of okay.
I remember it just really felt final. Yeah. I'm thinking even just that was one of those parts where you felt I don't know that he's going to make it through the night.
Yes.
Kind of deal. Yeah. And so, but again, one of the phrases you've used over is I feel like God has given us little miracles along the way. He hasn't given us this big miracle where he's healed him completely, but he's given us little miracles, and that's one of those. And for
so many people to witness, because so many people were following during that time, and then they were they tried radical and experimental treatments with him. We don't know what to do, because basically he needed another open heart surgery to go in and kind of clean things out and take out. He has fake hardware in there, and his cardiac surgeon said he will not come off my table alive. He can't survive this, which is where we're at now. He needs a heart surgery now, and we're trying Band-Aid fixes, these little heart casts. But at that time, everyone was following, so they tried experimental stuff, sent us home on 8 weeks of he had a PICC line that I had to give, kind of like an IV. Yep. And then I had to give antibiotics for 8 weeks. They'd never done a treatment that long. They're but I was the one, I'll do anything. Let's go. Anything as long as he kept going. Here's the thing. I have never made Aiden keep going when I thought he was done. Yeah. I've always promised him, when you show me you're done, I will respect that. Yeah. And we will stop medical. But this kid, if you guys know, by the next day, he was playing at his iPad. There's a picture that
he's amazing with an iPad.
This kid.
I'm telling you, for someone who they would say had brain defects and all kinds of things, the kid is a whiz with his iPad. He plays with an iPad, and he turns it on and off and swipes and opens program and does this stuff and does his games.
He's incredible. He could fix your iPad. If you don't take it to Apple Store, take it to Aiden.
Take it to Aiden.
No, and he only charges hugs. I mean, give him a hug.
He will reach out for you, and he melts your heart.
Yeah,
when he does.
He has such. It's that spirit that we just. People love him. Even if you've never met him, if you just watch video, we do this fun Instagram reels and stuff, and people around the world. We are not getting people from India, and there's a language barrier, and I'm on Google Translate. What are they saying? Oh, it's good. Okay, they love him. And just from a video, he has that much of a. You can tell his innocence and his joy for life. There's no faking. Yeah, I'm spitting all over the table here. His joy for life is just genuine. It's nothing I could teach him or but we believe we have other kids who are watching. They are watching what I'm doing with this journey. That's also 10 years of their life. And that's why when we talked earlier about that choice, that perspective, and I am very lucky. I will say my husband and I are very close. We are partners in this, and I know not everyone has that. So I want to say not everyone has a situation we do. For a
Yeah.
very supportive family and friends and a spouse, my husband and I are a team, always have, but from day one we were like, we're going to do this together. What are we doing? And that's one thing that's really important to us is this is also our other kids' lives. This is 10 years. This is a decade of their lives. And how are we going to show them and raise that, you know, because if not, if we just kept Aiden at home and was always sad, and that's their childhood. Like, I don't want their childhood to be remembered as just, you know.
And how has that impacted them? Especially the older ones, obviously.
Yeah. So the littlest, our 2-year-old, this is normal to him. So he's pretty oblivious. Everybody has a brother in a wheelchair and with a trach and vent. So I mean, like, they just in his world, and especially with COVID, he's not been. That's all he sees. That's his playmate. For Andrew and Ashley, we have had our challenges. For Ashley right now is, you know, she's in high school now, dealing her walk with faith through this and questioning. So she's very close. Our kids are all very close. We do have that. Andrew and Ashley might bicker a little bit, but with Aiden, they have that perfect. I could not have, and I've prayed. It was one of the things when we found out the diagnosis. I believe in you pray over the outcome that you want. And that's one thing I prayed to God of, like, if this baby survives, I want them to be really close siblings, especially Andrew and Aiden are only 18 months apart. So they should be best friends. But so Ashley, we always call her little mama. We never placed that on her. She just she has a naturally nurturing. She says she doesn't like kids. If you've ever seen the girl with a kid, you were like, the kid loves kids. Like, she is such a kid lover. But she helps do his tube feeds. She's been there. She actually has an award from the fire department because she saved his life before when he wasn't breathing, and she took the steps to help until help could arrive. And just an amazing relationship. So she is actually going through kind of that mama stuff right now. I'm right now walking through her with, Mom, how could a good and loving God do this to my brother, do this to our family? Like, she's very open of, this has ruined my life. And in some ways, you could say, I always tell her that's fair to say, because there are things we have to tell them, no, we can't do. And everything we do is surrounded by a wheelchair, a ventilator, is it handicap accessible? So there's a lot of things our family can't experience that we might otherwise. So navigating that with her right now as being a teen, questioning why our family. And when I've told her before, I really believe it's to shine God's love and to bring people to Jesus. And she has said to me before, that's not fair. I don't want that to be our family. And that hurts my heart when I'm in a different place, but I have to respect this is where she is, and how can I help nurture? And one of it is just by example. If I continue praising Jesus, Aiden just a few weeks ago stopped breathing before his, like, days before he's had a scheduled heart surgery, stopped breathing. It was very dramatic. I couldn't bring him back. We were rushing to the hospital. And in the moment, I didn't realize until my husband said later, I guess I just kept screaming, like, Jesus, help him. Lord, Jesus, just please help him. And I think them seeing that, like, that I am always turning
to him.
Yes. In that, like, you can't make up a story. Like, you can't, this is how I'm going to be in this moment when my son, like, we had him out of his car seat as my husband's going 90 down the interstate. He's blue. You can't train your mind for that. It's just what's on your heart of, like, I tried everything medically possible, and it was like, okay, Jesus,
you
it's
couldn't
you.
fix this
I
anymore.
could not. It was and there's very few times, you know, most of the times we have what we need, you know, at home to do it, and we were already on the road, but we had everything in our van. But and so just
they see that. Well, and more than that, and it seems like they don't just. As Oscar Wilde says, people they'll forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And, like, it seems to me the people that are around you guys the most, what they're going to remember the most is your joy. That there's you can't fake joy, and your joy is a weapon, and your joy is a powerful thing for people to experience when they're around you, know your story. I'm curious, like, what would you tell people that I'm sure you've shared a little bit about what you and your daughter, how you navigate and process through that, and you give her space, and then you offer your perspective. But from someone that's been in your shoes and walked through what you've walked through, if people were watching or listening and maybe their questions are, man, pain and suffering, or maybe they're just like, look, I just got a diagnosis and I do not have this spirit and this joy that you have. And I honestly am, like, wrestling and struggling with how to stay above water right now. I know there are no magic bullets, but I'm curious, what from your perspective that you've learned, that you've walked through, that you've experienced, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think most importantly is finding a community. It is from day one. I've walked away from communities over the years. I've had different ones that, I was in special needs communities that were like me. And then when it served its purpose, it was time to step away. But getting in with a community that's either like a part of your diagnosis or a church that even if you don't believe in God, your church community will love you through it regardless. I can't tell you, I have lots of friends that do not believe in God, but they still come to me because they still know that I will genuinely pray for them and love them through it. So having that community, and then finding, whether it's podcast or videos, that brings me so much peace when I'm in my darkest moments. And usually it's like at 3 a.m. when no one's awake, and you're feeling really alone in your mind. Again, I do struggle with anxiety. And so my mind will start going. And that's what I do. I'm like immediately either worship music or let me get a podcast that's going to, yes,
feed your spirit.
It is. And it's a constant, like, you have to be intentional about it. I feel like every day, that doesn't mean that tomorrow, I don't already assume that tomorrow I'm going to be great. And I also allow myself, I think, really respecting that. I'm very open. I'm on social media and stuff. And that's one thing I've always done. I'm very open about when I'm having a bad day. I'm not afraid to cry in front of people, to show them I am human too. And I'm not always joyful. I need prayer. I think humbling yourself to say, I need help and I need prayer, or I need space, whatever it may look like and be. But I think having a community, you can't do anything alone. I could never, I would not be sitting here right now. And I'm not talking about just with God, but with human, support. It is so important to have a community and to be honest. You have to be honest with yourself. And at least have a couple of confidants that you are brutally on, that know your deepest, darkest, that you might be ashamed of. You need at least one or two people that you can say.
Well, it's one of the things you shared on Sunday is that in pain, often we run from God, you talked about how Jesus, when he was, when he went to his deepest moment of pain and crushing and pressing, he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, which was a place of crushing and pressing. You asked, I think, it's just a powerful question. Where do you run to? And you can't run to something without running from something. And I think what you said, and
I feel like she preached it better. So,
So
you need community.
Yeah, you need community.
And you need God. So we tend to run from community and from God rather than to him and to others. And so what a powerful, just truth that you shared with that. And, one of the things I wanted to make sure to highlight before we wrap up, and I have just some closing thoughts, and love to get your closing thoughts and anything that you'd want to share. One of the things that I think also I can say that I've seen that maybe has helped carry you through this, and maybe you could speak to this just for a second, is that in all of those sleepless nights, because you're taking care of Aiden, that you started a business. So on top of, after you just heard about everything she has to do to take care of her, not just one son with incredible needs, but you have 4 children now. You also have a business, Mountain Feather Designs. Is that right?
Yes.
And which we have bought a lot of beautiful jewelry. You're wearing a necklace there that is like faith inspired. I don't know how else to describe it. Maybe you can, but I feel like can you just briefly talk about how it's like when you started that and what it is? And I would love for people, if they want to not only just support you, but if they want I feel like there's something behind every piece, and I feel like you and I know you pray over those pieces. And so how did that come about?
So it actually started when Aiden had his second open heart surgery. We were actually gifting. Our family is big about giving back. We have been blessed both just in life and financially, that we love to gift and give back. So we, from the time Aiden was like a week old, we were like, how can we give back? So we would gift necklaces that another maker, it's like a huge company, would make. I would buy those, give them to heart moms. And my husband started to say, like, honey, this is getting pretty expensive. Like, this is really
give away all his jewelry.
Like as many moms as I'm like, the whole floor is getting one for you and you and you. And my
was
husband's
Oprah
like,
at children's.
And so I just had such a heart, like God placed that where I was like, no, they all need jewelry, honey. And it wasn't just about jewelry. It was with that meaning behind it. You are seen, you are supported, you are loved. So my husband came to me like the day after. We might have still been in the cardiac ICU even. And he was like, babe, I have an idea. And I was like, oh, great. Like, what's okay, I just didn't sleep all night, but go ahead. He was like, I think you could learn how to make jewelry. And I laughed hysterically. And I was like, okay. But that's one thing about him. He has so much faith in me. That man, is such an encourager. Like you,
cool.
Yeah, I'm very blessed of like his, like, you can do this. And he had already had YouTube videos pulled up with me. He already had supplies on the way in the mail because he believed in me that much. And he was like, this is what you need to do. So I did. Like a week later, Aiden gets out of the hospital. I start tinkering with it and sharing it online. And people were like, I really love, especially the special needs community. I first started out, it's evolved over time, but it was a lot of like awareness pieces and things that people wanted about their child with Down syndrome or autism. So it started like that. And then it started turning in as it actually grew. I was like, oh, wow, people actually want my jewelry. One, we were able to donate all the necklaces to my heart's desire to the hospital, but it gave me something to do in those middle of the night hours. Like I've got to be awake anyways, watching Aiden. Why don't I do something with purpose? Like let me do something that can bless others and share God's love. Cause they were very, either had your child's name on it or like a scripture. So it was, you know, faith or, now, we're at the point that God has taken our business. Because fun fact, I went to school for business. Like I went to college at 16. Like I had big dreams. Like I'm going to work in corporate America, storm the world, you know, work in downtown. And that was one of the first things when we got the diagnosis. I did look at my husband and said, my dreams are gone. Like I have to be a full-time caretaker. And I was angry. That was an angry moment at God of like, I worked so hard for this. Like I worked my way through college and like to do these things. And, you don't know how God's going to answer your prayers. And he's continued to grow that business. And we do something that we love about our business. I pray over every piece that goes out the door. And a lot of people, I think, aren't Christians that shop with me. And I thought, you know what, if they have that little touch of either some people share their story in their notes, or I can kind of figure it out if it's a remembrance piece. They've lost a baby or a loved one. Because we can take like your loved one's actual handwriting, your actual baby footprint and stuff. So we just pray over those pieces, and whatever God lays on my heart to pray over. Every prayer looks different, and
that's
so
powerful.
we were able to.
Oh my gosh!
And it is incredible jewelry. And so, how can people who are watching this or listening, how can they find it?
Yeah, so I have a website, which is mountainfeatherdesigns.com. I'm also active if you want to see Aiden all the time. He's pretty much daily on my Instagram, which is Mountain Feather Designs. So we're over there dancing. And
so
mountainfeathersdesigns.com.
With an S at the end or no?
Designs, yes. It's just
Mountain Feathers Designs.
Not feathers.
Mountain Feather Designs.
There you go.
They'll put the show notes. Mountainfeatherdesigns.com, and then your Instagram at Mountain Feather Designs. Okay.
Yes.
Go
follow her.
You're on Facebook.
Go follow her.
I'm not super. I'm not super
Instagram.
active on Facebook. You're not really going to see like the family cuteness. Instagram's where I share pretty much every day. I'm on there, just sharing our behind the scenes. I'm also available on there to pray for you. I am very open, and just come to me. Like I will send you a voice message if some people are like, oh, how do you have time? Well, at 3 a.m. when I have not, you might get a voice message from me, because we still, it's not as intense, but we still do a lot of sleepless nights with little Aiden.
I'm inspired.
I am too. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And just before we close, I wanted to highlight something, and that is that the day that this episode is airing is actually Good Friday. And so it's going to release this coming Friday. And, I talked a little bit about Good Friday on last Sunday, and just, when we wrestle with the idea of how can a good God allow suffering. And I know we didn't really dive into the critical thoughts, and I didn't need any of that. Like, your story was such a powerful testimony that it almost overwhelms my thoughts and reasons and rationales. You know what I mean? And so as I was thinking about Good Friday, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about this, but something you said gave me a different perspective on Good Friday than I've ever had before. And I said something Sunday where I just said, I've always wrestled with the idea of calling it Good Friday because I think what happened to Jesus was anything but good. But the perspective is always out from our side, that it was good for us. What God did in that horrific death that Jesus faced was for our good. And I don't know if you have any perspectives about Good Friday and if you have anything, but the thing that you said early that caught my attention, and I did not forget it because I knew I wanted to say this. When you said that from the time you were young, you struggled with the thought of Mary as a mother watching her son suffer.
Yeah.
And then as you're talking, I'm hearing you talk about Aiden suffering and how you've had to, for 10 years almost, watch him suffer and be in pain. I just had this visual that I think is often overlooked in the story, which is Mary, who was at the cross. His mom was at the cross watching him go through all of that. And I don't know, when you just said that, something just connected in my mind. I was like, that is a perspective that I had not really ever considered, was how excruciatingly difficult it must have been for Jesus's mom to watch him suffer like that. I just never thought of it quite to that depth than hearing your story and you say that. That just moved me.
She was human, and I think people over, like, I was talking about it yesterday on Instagram, how I'm starting Holy Week devotionals and things, and how I'm like sobbing and emotional. People are like, what are your problems? But I'm like, I feel so deeply, not only for what Jesus went through, that just tears my soul apart. But and then Sunday we'll be rejoicing. But you know, but what Mary and his friends, I mean, like the loved ones that watched this and was helpless. You're so helpless. And like what was going through her mind of like, why my son? You know, was she saying, why my son? Like, she knew the purpose, but just like you said, if you're a parent, or even if you just love someone, if you've ever experienced love, just thinking of watching
suffering,
that
powerful. Any thoughts about Good Friday?
Sorry,
I didn't mean to bring the mood down. It was intense, this thought. And
I've said before, I hate Christian movies.
You do have a disdain for Christian movies.
They're all just, I feel like, so cheesy. So I almost don't. But when you mentioned that, it's interesting, because when you talked about that earlier at the beginning of the episode, my mind flashed back to 15 years ago when I saw Passion of the Christ, and the parts of that movie that moved me the most were that.
Yes.
But I've never thought of it that way until you brought that up, and I just. Again, your story speaks louder than 1,000 words that anyone could give. But to anyone watching this, that maybe your pain looks different, and maybe your pain is the loss of a parent, maybe whatever the pain may be, there's things on this side of heaven that we're not going to have neat answers for. Yeah. A former mentor of mine once said, and I don't know why, but this question itself gives me comfort. He said, can you trust God with a mystery? Can you trust God when you don't have the why? And to the answer of pain, one of the biggest things about Good Friday is that Jesus, to the answer of pain, entered it full force. Yeah. That on Good Friday, what we're remembering is, for those of us in a faith context, that the Son of God, who didn't deserve anything. Yeah. It's hard for me to say why does bad things happen to good people when I think about me, because I'm like, I'm not a good person.
Not that good. Yeah.
What for my, like, but Jesus, the innocent, holy Son of God, voluntarily allowed himself to be led away, tortured, flogged, whipped, and nailed to a cross for me. It's what separates Christianity from every other religion, as every other religion is an attempt by your efforts to get to God, and Christianity is the only one where God came for us, and he came to save us and came for us. And what Jesus did on the cross in pain, it does a few things. And number one is now anytime we pray to someone who can relate, because he's been through the pain. Yeah. There is, of all the tragedies, there's no greater tragedy than the Son of God being tortured to death by sinful men. And he, even before he got to the cross, can relate. A lot of, it's not in Scripture, but a lot of scholars believe he lost his father when he was a teenager. Jesus wept when his friend Lazarus died. He had best friends betray him. And then at the cross, he experienced physical pain, spiritual pain. But we also believe, because of the cross, that Jesus by the power of the Spirit, has the power to heal our pain.
Mm-hmm.
That there's some things that won't be wrapped up neatly this side of heaven, but it doesn't mean that he can't comfort us with a comfort that in our darkest moments doesn't even make sense. It doesn't. You can't even explain it. That in the moments of greatest agony, there's this peace that you can't even articulate. And then the third thing it does is Jesus on the cross broke the power of everything that has caused us pain.
Yeah.
So that one day, not just on earth can we begin to experience healing, but one day there is an ultimate healing. And I did just want to share one. When you first told me about your story, and not only your spirit and your joy, but what you're doing with the company, which go buy all the pieces. I'm going to go find something. Will there be anything that look good on me?
Yeah, I have men's pieces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's great stuff.
Okay.
It is my go-to every Christmas.
Yeah.
Like last year Christmas, I'm like, Kayla, she wants this, and I'm buying pieces.
Yeah.
There's you mentioned it offline, and I'm glad you circled back on it at the end, is because I think about perspective, but with you also think about purpose. Yeah. In the first few minutes talking, you talked about how you had to find you chose to find purpose.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what to bring purpose to your pain. And I thought about this story. This is the Message paraphrase. This is Jesus in John 9. This is walking down the street. Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents, causing him to be born blind?" In other words, why?
Yep.
So pain always causes us to ask why. In fact, one of the things that's comforting to me is even Jesus, the Son of God on the cross, asked why.
Did you forsake me?
Mentally he knew.
Yeah.
Yep.
But pain has a way of causing our emotions to say, but why?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus said, "You're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause and effect here." And I love this line, "Look instead for what God can do."
Yeah.
And when I think about your story, I think about how there are still probably till the day you die going to be why questions.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're going to get to heaven and say, "Jesus, let's have a talk."
Yeah,
I wanna-
absolutely.
But you, instead of allowing your life to be buried under the why, have chosen to leverage your spirit, your giftings, your talents to look instead for what God can do. And God has used just your family, your life, your spirit as a platform to bring hope to people that may otherwise not have hope, to bring joy to people. And I just say I'm learning from you and inspired by you. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much. In fact, maybe sometime we'd have to get you back on here because and we got to go, but you dropped at the before we even started recording how you came to Christ, and your story from childhood was crazy, and we won't get into that now. But when you put all that together, the fact that you have the faith that you do is a testimony in itself, and it is inspiring, as you've said. And so thank you so much for sharing your story, God's story, that he's writing through you and Aiden and your whole family. This was powerful, so powerful. And I know not just for me and probably you, but for everyone, I hope, that is watching and listening. So thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that's all we have for today's episode, and we hope that this maybe touched you, this spoke to you. And I would just say that if you have any thoughts, or if this moves some feelings or thoughts in you, we would love to know. And if you want to share them with us, we'll share them with Kayla, or you can find her yourself. But you can always send us an email to podcast@thex.church. And if you have any comments, thoughts, suggestions, please share them with us. I want to encourage you. This is such a powerful story.
Yeah.
I would just challenge you, share this with somebody. If there's somebody that you know that is going through something difficult, that's wrestling with God right now because of what they're walking through, share this story with them by sending this video to somebody. And I just really pray that it brings hope to people. And so thank you once again for tuning in, and we can't wait to see you next time. God bless.